This takes place in Australia, spanning from the 1960s to the mid-1980s. Raymond Edmunds was born on March 12, 1944, at the Queen Victoria Hospital in Melbourne, Australia. Ray was adopted and only learned this during his teenage years. His adoptive father, Harold, was a domineering businessman, and his mother was timid. Ray, who was spoiled by his parents, grew up isolated but found solace in playing the trumpet. As a preteen, Ray's bedwetting led his mother to seek medical help, which resulted in a prescription error. Ray was given strong hormones that induced early puberty. Despite this and frequent moves, Ray's early years showed no signs of his future disturbing actions. By the time Ray became a young adult, he was notably tall and strong, standing 6 feet and weighing 11 stone, often seen in a leather jacket. He was popular among both men and women, some of whom saw him as exceptionally charming. Socializing with women became his main focus, leading him to meet Leslie in 1960 in Yaranga. Leslie, only 16 and full of confidence, caught the eye of many but quickly fell for Raymond. They soon had a child, Susan, and married within a year, despite Raymond's infidelities. He often spent nights out under the pretext of playing his trumpet at local bars, but in reality, he pursued other women, even during Leslie's labor with Susan. Ray worked as a laborer on a local farm, but with limited prospects, he aimed to become a share farmer for a better income. In 1964, Ray secured a job on a farm northeast of Shepparton, handling irrigation, orchards, and livestock. He moved there with Leslie and their 2 children, embracing this new start. Yet, his disregard for his wife and women in general led to an abusive relationship, turning their large, semi-rundown white farmhouse into a place of torment for Leslie. Once settled, Ray quickly resumed his search for the company of other women in the nearby towns. He often returned home with traces of lipstick on his face, but Leslie learned it was safer not to question him. Past inquiries had only led to severe beatings. While Leslie toiled on the farm, milking cattle and managing her 2 young children, it was disheartening to see Ray leave work early to pursue other local women. Frequently, after a long day, Leslie would find another woman in her bed with Ray. Enduring constant emotional and physical abuse, Leslie felt trapped. She was young, naive, isolated, and responsible for 2 children, yet she clung to the hope that things might eventually get better. By late 1964, Leslie grew tired of working while Ray squandered their earnings, often leaving her and their children without food. One day, after seeing Ray return from the bank, Leslie quickly took the wages from his car's glove box before he could spend them. For the first time, she decided to rebel. When Ray discovered what Leslie had done, he flew into a murderous fury. He stormed into the house and unleashed a brutal assault on Leslie, hitting and throwing her until she was covered in bruises. The children, traumatized, began to scream, but their cries did nothing to stop Ray. Amidst the ringing in her ears, Leslie could hear her children's terror. She tried to comfort them, but Ray continued his rampage right in front of them. In a final vicious act, he struck Leslie so hard on the arm that he broke it. Following this, Leslie fled the house with her children to stay with her parents. However, the stay was short-lived, only 2 weeks, due to lack of space, forcing her to return. Trapped and isolated, Leslie soon found herself pregnant again. With no alternatives and surrounded by despair, she faced a bleak existence. At this time, Ray's behavior grew increasingly disturbing. He started spying on women at night and escalated his cruelty on the farm, even beating a dog and a cow to death. Meanwhile, Leslie lived in constant fear. Ray would play cruel pranks on her and the children, like pretending to go out, then staying home to remove light bulbs and make eerie noises, only to jump out and startle them for his amusement. This portion of the story is particularly disturbing. Leslie once caught Raymond forcing himself upon his own 3-year-old daughter, Susan. Meanwhile, the nearby town of Shepparton was flourishing with a population of 15,000 by 1966, fueled by the agricultural boom and adopting features reminiscent of California, such as drive-in theaters and diners. The new Civic Center, which hosted concerts and dances, became a cultural focal point. On the evening of February 10, 1966, this center was buzzing with excitement over the Mod Spectacular musical show. Among the attendees were 18-year-old Gary Haywood and 16-year-old Abina Medill, who was romantically linked to another man named Ian. After the concert, Gary and Abina, amid rumors of an affair, drove to a secluded paddock by a lake. The subsequent events were pieced together through a detailed criminal investigation. Ray, armed with a .22 caliber Mossberg rifle, stumbled upon the young couple. He ambushed them, forcing them at gunpoint into Gary's car to drive to a more isolated area 37 kilometers away. There, he ordered them out of the car and into a nearby field. Ray demanded that Abina remove her stockings, which he then used to tie up Gary. With Gary restrained, Ray began his assault on Abina, forcibly removing her clothing from the waist down and subjecting her to a brutal and violent attack. When Abina momentarily broke free and attempted to escape, Ray caught her and ferociously bludgeoned her until her skull was crushed, resulting in her death from severe brain trauma. He then turned to Gary, still bound by the stockings, and executed him with a shot to the head. These horrifying actions marked Raymond's first known murders. Gary and Abina were reported missing shortly after their disappearance, sparking a police investigation initially deemed as a typical runaway case. However, when Gary's beloved car was found abandoned, suspicion quickly fell on Abina's boyfriend, Ian Quart, who had previously threatened Gary. Despite being arrested and harshly interrogated, it soon emerged that Ian was not involved. Nevertheless, he remained the prime suspect in the community's eyes until his accidental death 6 years later. The investigation, plagued by malpractice and negligence, failed to resolve the case for over 19 years, allowing it to go cold. After a heated argument involving a shotgun, Raymond and his family moved to northeastern Victoria, where he worked as a butcher. The relationship with Leslie eventually collapsed, and she left Ray, taking up with a new partner, but leaving their 3 children behind. Leslie did not see her children for the next 4 years. Ray married again to Colleen Knight and moved with their 6 children to Melbourne. Ray worked multiple jobs, and they hired a 14-year-old babysitter to help out. Allegations later surfaced that Ray had assaulted the babysitter multiple times. These incidents only came to light following a series of assaults in the Donvale area of Melbourne in 1971. In the quiet suburb of Donvale, 25-year-old Susan had just settled her 2 young children and newborn baby for the night. Her husband was out with friends, giving her the chance to clean the house. As she entered the laundry room for a bucket, she caught sight of a man's figure. At first, she mistook him for her husband returning early, but the realization hit when she saw the stocking mask over his face. It was Raymond Edmunds. Susan's scream of shock was cut short as Raymond, brandishing a long kitchen knife, rushed at her and seized her, hissing in a Scottish accent, "Keep quiet, don't scream and I won't hurt you." Raymond initially demanded money, but when Susan confessed she had none, he chillingly suggested she compensate in other ways. "Well, you better get undressed then," he demanded. Susan protested, explaining her recent childbirth and stitches, but Raymond coldly replied, "I know about the stitches. I won't hurt you," revealing his prior stalking. He then bound her hands and feet with stockings, placed her on a chair, and assaulted her. After the attack, Raymond fled, leaving behind only his bare footprints and a vile smell, a mix of stale milk, manure, and chemicals. This odor would later earn him the media nickname Mr. Stinky. In August 1972, Raymond Edmunds escalated his series of attacks. He entered the home of a woman, waking her with the threat of a 12-inch blade. She tried to deter him by claiming her husband would be home soon and that there were guests in the house, but Raymond, having stalked her, knew her husband was out of the city for several days. Dismissing her pleas, he tossed a blanket over the cot beside her bed and assaulted her multiple times. Raymond's pattern of terror was methodical and calculated. He targeted Melbourne women, typically in their 20s with young children, meticulously monitoring their routines. He noted the times their husbands departed and returned, calculating his opportunities to enter their homes, commit his crimes, and escape unnoticed. Understanding the mother's desperation to protect their children, he exploited their fear to ensure compliance. Consistently, he operated barefoot, leaving behind a distinctive and unpleasant stench that became a hallmark of his crimes. The details of many cases involving Raymond Edmunds remain sparse, with victims' identities protected. Notably, in 1976, he broke into a home in Wheelers Hill and committed indecent acts in front of the terrified homeowner. His criminal activities escalated in 1977, with 3 aggravated burglaries, assaults, and sexual assaults on 5 women. During one of these attacks, the victims' young children were forced to listen from another room. Raymond chillingly told one woman, "I just want to make love." It is estimated that he assaulted over 30 women. The police, struggling to identify him, created a sculpture of the suspect based on descriptions. Despite obtaining fingerprints from crime scenes between 1971 and 1984, they couldn't match them to any on file, making the search for Mr. Stinky challenging. A breakthrough came unexpectedly when a young detective reviewing cold cases matched a fingerprint from Raymond's collection, known as Mr. Stinky's prints, to those found on Gary Haywood's car, a link that suggested his capability for murder. In 1983, a task force was formed to capture him, but it was downscaled by 1985 due to lack of progress. Raymond's capture came unexpectedly on March 16, 1985, in Albury, New South Wales. He was caught acting indecently in his car at a supermarket. Alerted by customers, the police arrested him on the spot. Although he was initially released on bail, his fingerprints were sent to a centralized bank in Sydney and matched those from several unsolved cases. Police swiftly arrested him at his workplace, presenting him with the damning fingerprint evidence. Facing overwhelming proof, Raymond realized his crimes had finally caught up with him, culminating in charges for numerous sexual assaults and a double murder. After his arrest, Raymond turned to a police officer and said, "Get me a priest. I will tell you everything." Once provided with a priest, Raymond began to confess, admitting to a staggering 30 crimes. However, Victoria's laws limited police interrogation times, though extensions could be granted. In Raymond's case, they secured 2 extensions, totaling 18 hours of interview time. Despite this, it proved insufficient. Raymond was in the midst of confessing to another murder when they were forced to conclude the interrogation due to legal time constraints. Ultimately, Raymond substantially confessed to only 5 of the 30 sexual assaults and the double murder of Gary and Abina, which allowed for corroboration with existing evidence. He was found guilty of these crimes and sentenced to 30 years in prison with a minimum term of 16 years, widely criticized as lenient given the severity of his offenses. While in prison in 1992, Raymond nearly escaped after bypassing one set of security checkpoints. His escape attempt was thwarted by a vigilant prison dog named S, who detected his presence and helped capture him. In 2019, at the age of 75, Raymond Edmunds faced additional charges as 8 more women, including the babysitter previously mentioned, courageously came forward to detail the horrific assaults they endured at his hands. These new allegations were consistent with his known modus operandi of breaking into homes and assaulting the occupants. One victim attempted to fight back, but was brutally beaten and disfigured by Raymond. She likely survived only because her elderly mother arrived home in time to interrupt the attack. These new charges added 23 years and 5 months to Raymond's sentence, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, offering some measure of justice to his many victims. Although it's believed that Raymond assaulted over 100 women during his criminal career, the murderer known as Mr. Stinky, a nickname derived from his distinct body odor, has only confessed to a fraction of these crimes. His legal team argued for leniency, citing his admissions as helping to resolve outstanding cases. Court reporter Eliza Rugg detailed that Raymond is resigned to dying in prison, acknowledging his role in the murder of 2 teenagers from Shepparton in 1966. His confession included attacks on mothers and pregnant women, some occurring while their children were mere meters away. One of his elderly victims, now 73, expressed that she continues to live in fear and feels a profound sense of unworthiness. Despite his dire circumstances, Raymond reportedly enjoys working in the prison kitchen at Port Phillip and still receives regular visits from his second wife. Notably, he has never shown remorse for his actions, and in discussions with his psychiatrist, he attributed his crimes to being intoxicated, further avoiding responsibility for his actions. There is one more victim that must be discussed in Raymond Edmunds' chilling series of crimes. During his last round of police interviews, Raymond briefly began confessing to the cold case of Elaine Jones. Unfortunately, the police couldn't gather sufficient evidence to charge him, and he later recanted any involvement. Elaine Jones, her husband Alan, and their 2 daughters were camping in Toam Wall on January 3, 1980. At 9:30 p.m., Elaine, 39-year-olds, left their tent to buy cigarettes and chocolate from the town shops. She took a quiet dirt road, carrying a torch, and dressed in blue jeans, blue sneakers, and a white knitted top. That evening, her husband Alan, feeling unwell, stayed behind in the tent. The family felt safe in the area, but tragically, Elaine never returned. When Alan realized Elaine was missing, he alerted the police and took their youngest daughter, aged 7, on a boat along the Murray River to search for her. Heartbreakingly, he found Elaine's naked body caught on a river log. Her throat had been brutally cut, nearly decapitating her, and she had suffered severe head injuries and was horrifically sexually assaulted. Overwhelmed by the gruesome scene, Alan's heart failed from shock as he began navigating the boat back to camp, dying instantly. This left their young daughter alone on the boat with her deceased parents. Fortunately, the girl managed to turn off the engine and swim to shore for help. The story of Mr. Stinky, Raymond Edmunds, encompasses a string of harrowing crimes that, despite their severity, remain relatively unknown. Now 80 years old, Raymond will spend the remainder of his life in prison, his extensive criminal legacy a dark chapter in Australian history.